Ask any Chicagoan about their favorite meal or restaurant, and they'll give you a guide to a Chicago landmark or legendary spot with a sense of pride. Now we've got a new book and the book tour coming to us, giving us the stories behind these iconic Chicago dishes. Celebrated food editors Monica Eng and David Hammond here. Latest book called Made in Chicago, Stories Behind 30 Great Hometown Bites. Thank you so much for your time today.
Great to
Thanks
be
for
here.
having us.
I want to say, as a Chicagoan, I think I looked at the title of this book and I was like, oh my goodness, I'm going to read about all these things I already know. But I was surprised by how many of the dishes maybe I wasn't as familiar with. Is that going to be a surprise for many of the readers?
I mean, and that was the whole point. I mean, I think what we found was that that food, especially Chicago invented foods, are very divided and frankly segregated in this city. A lot of people on the north side have never heard of sweet steak. A lot of people on the south side have never had a nakutagawa. And so we're hoping this will bring people together, help us understand each other in our own city, and give us lots of delicious stories and reasons to go check out all the specialties of Chicago, or at least 30 of them, because there are more than 30.
Because I think, I grew up on the north side, but I have a lot of family on the south side. And I really credit them when they were like, let's go to a restaurant. And they would tell me beforehand, here's what you have to order. You get the mild sauce. We're going to Lawrence Fisheries. Here's what we're going to eat. And I don't think some of these south side staples I've ever seen my relatives outside of like family gatherings or these restaurants.
And very few of them make it to the north side, as Monica was saying. Yeah, like mild sauce just made it to Oak Park, which is north of the Eisenhower, within the last 12 months. First time I spotted it, at least. And I think that what this book will encourage is exploration of our city. Perhaps we'll bring the city together, as Monica described, but I think when I first started getting interested in food writing in the early aughts, one of the most amazing parts of it was I found myself traveling to neighborhoods I'd never been to before and finding out about those neighborhoods, not just places to eat, but what people were doing there, what the real estate looked like. I mean, just getting a general feel for that part of town. And the lure, the carrot for all that was the food that was in those neighborhoods. I went to have lunch, but I found out discovering a whole new part of Chicago I knew nothing about. And I think this book will help do that. We did include in every chapter a list of several places where you can go to purchase the food item we talked about in that chapter. And we made the book small enough so that you could fit it in your overalls or your glove compartment or your purse or your backpack or whatever, so that you can use it as kind of a guidebook around the city. And as I say, it's a guide not only to food, but to different neighborhoods and cultures within the city.
And actually, someone on Twitter recently tweeted to us, "Hey, I love your book, but I'd love it if you had a map that kind of showed you how to get there." Maybe we should do an interactive thing online so that we could give people a map of places you can go to get each dish. And just to emphasize that sort of unfamiliarity with other people's food in the city, I recently interviewed 7 of the mayoral candidates, and I won't say which one, but it's one who will probably be our next mayor. When I asked that, him, do you prefer mild sauce or lemon pepper? That candidate said, well, I don't like anything spicy, so I guess I'd say mild sauce.
Okay, I know who that is.
Clearly, that person had never heard of these things that are an absolute staple to most Southsiders, African-American Southsiders especially.
Yeah, that is great. We got to catch these candidates up on their Chicago history. Yeah. The other thing that I love about this book is that it's perfect. Mother's Day, Father's Day is coming up. People moving to Chicago. I hope every real estate agent gives it as a housewarming gift for every purchase that they get.
Great idea.
From your mouth.
I've been trying to get the book into O'Hare Airport, where I think it would be, people getting off the plane, they're hungry. Chicago. A lot of people come to Chicago for the food. Usually it's the higher end food. And I think one advantage of our book is we're looking at food that doesn't get a lot of attention in the media, in most media. I mean, Tribune does a great job of digging deep into local foods, but most of the attention goes to the Michelin-starred, the James Beard Award-winning restaurants. Totally understandable that that's the case. I'm hoping this book will drive people to the smaller mom and pop places that don't have the benefit of public relations representation, don't get a lot of press, but are fascinating in their own right and give you a peek into a culture that's not your own.
Let's go through a couple of the dishes that we talk about in the book. First of all, Italian beef. Obviously, a lot of times people come to Chicago and they're like, I'm going to have some meat. I got to go try an Italian beef. And especially with the show The Bear, there's a lot of interest, not just from Chicagoans, but people traveling to our city who are like, I've been watching the show. Tell me a little bit about this dish.
Well, it is one of those dishes that is somewhat known outside Chicago city limits. I mean, the standard line is that nobody outside Chicago has ever heard of Italian beef. Not quite true. I mean, Joe Mantegna, the actor, started a Chicago place in Las Vegas. I believe it's closed right now. There was like a Chicago food place in Vegas. New York, I'm sure, has similar things. But basically, the Italian beef is a Chicago thing. And sometimes when I bring out-of-towners in to have an Italian beef, the reaction is, what's the big deal? It's a wet beef sandwich. And, I kind of get that. And I think that it's a big deal to Chicagoans because it's ours. There's some tribal affiliations there that it's hard to ignore. And I've seen the same thing happen. Like Monica could talk about the sweet steak sandwich. I had my first one just a few weeks ago. And I waited 90 minutes for that sandwich. And it was like, I've never waited 90 minutes for anything to eat, certainly. And yet the room was filled with people. Like I counted throughout our 90-minute wait. There were a regular 24 people in the room, everyone waiting quietly, politely, waiting for their delicious neighborhood sandwich, the sweet steak sandwich. And I thought it was fine. I didn't grow up with it, so I don't have the same kind of nostalgic attraction to it that I think some might have. But I understand the impulse to hold something dear to you that has become your thing. And that can go both ways. It works with the Italian beef. It also goes against ketchup on a hot dog. Chicagoans love to talk about how ketchup is like the worst thing you could possibly put on a hot dog. I wouldn't do it, but it's not all that terrible. But I think Chicagoans like sharing that, like sharing it with one another, giving knowing looks, kind of like sharing a shot of Malort. It's like a Chicago thing that makes people feel good to be Chicagoans.
Since you just mentioned the Malort thing, obviously Kelly Clarkson recently had it on her show, which brought it to the national platform. People have been hashtagging Malort face, and it was one of those things that I like gin, and it tastes almost like a version of that. So I think my Malort face is not as crazy as maybe some of the other ones. You're in Chicago. Now you've kind of passed the test by taking a shot of this mysterious liquor.
Well, Monica had her first sip of Malort on air earlier this month. How did you like it, Monica?
I didn't.
Yeah, right.
But I'm told that you need to have it 3 times before you start liking it.
And was it just the once, or did you have it more than one time?
That was it. We were on WGN Radio, and I tried it live on the air. Did not enjoy it.
Did give us a good
Malort. Sounds like I gotta
face,
drink
though.
it more.
You can have it 2 more times, and then we'll chat again.
Yeah,
it is one of those things that Chicagoans consider their own, and as Monica was saying with Malort face, it's if people come in from out of town buying them a Malort, hey, you want a shot of Chicago's own Malort? Sure, I've never had it before. Excellent. Then you give them the shot, you take the picture, you post on Instagram, #MalortFace. It's although like you, Rudy, I don't find it that objectionable. Although I like Amaros too, like Fernet Branca and Ramazzotti and so on. So I mean, they're somewhat bitter. Many are somewhat bitters. In fact, bitter. In fact, they can be referred to as bitters. Malort, however, is extremely bitter because it's very wormwood forward. That's the main herb that's in there, and that is a notoriously bitter herb. And it's that herb and the thujone in that herb that was thought to drive people mad when it was included in absinthe. And that's why it was banned in Europe and the United States for a long time. Now it's found that, it doesn't really drive you crazy or blind, so you can drink it, and it's kind of a good time.
Plus, it's cold here 9 out of the 12 months of the year, so we need something to keep us a little bit warm.
Yeah.
There you go.
The other thing too, something that everybody wants to share is the mix of Chicago popcorns. And obviously an older term was the Chicago mix, which isn't owned by Garrett's Popcorn, and now it's the Garrett's mix. But talk a little bit about that combination and how that became such a Chicago staple.
We have to thank Gene Siskel for that, the former Chicago food, now passed away, film critic. He had there's an article that quoted him in the Tribune saying, Well, he apparently used to bring his popcorn to movie theaters. Probably because I think it was because he thought he could get better popcorn outside the movie theater and then bring it in. I don't know exactly what his motivation was, but he said, okay, now this is going to sound disgusting, but hear me out. I saw a guy get half and half caramel corn and cheddar corn, and he mixed them together. And it's fantastic. I mean, the mix of sweet and savory. It was after that Garrett started marketing Chicago Mix, a name that was then purchased, a trademark that was purchased by Candyland, a company in Minnesota, which now owns the name so that Garrett's can no longer use Chicago Mix. Not just Garrett's, but no producer of a caramel cheddar corn mix can use the name Chicago Mix. Although some people try to skirt around it, calling it Chicago Style or Chicago's Original. I'll tell you, Candyland comes down hard on them too. So
I was at O'Hare on Saturday, and in Terminal 5 they have mostly automated stuff. So there's a Nuts on Clark machine where you can put $9 in, and then it dispenses a bag, and then you can get something called Mix, and it's caramel corn and cheese corn for $9, and then for $5 you can get buttered popcorn. And I was like, oh, why does it say Chicago Mix? And I'd forgotten about your story that they just can call it Mix. And
it is fantastic. I'm sure you've had it, Rudy. It's I brought home a few bags of it a few weeks ago, and it was gone in less than 12 hours. I mean, all of it was evaporated.
At the James Beard Award Gala this year at the Civic Opera House, in the lobby, that was the gift they were giving all the fancy visitors, Garrett's Mix.
And everybody wanted to make sure to take, sometimes you don't take something and then you're like, I'm not going to pass up on this Garrett's.
I was like, I'm taking that.
And the funny thing too about Monica is that I've been, when I've traveled through O'Hare, and obviously you're trying to get back home and you're tired and you're thinking of all the things you have to do, but I smell the popcorn and I was like, I have to stop and get some. Like it does something to you that you're like, I need to get it. Like I have to make a stop, even though I know where it's at home, I have to do it.
It's bewitching, and that's part of the way they do it. I used to work at Navy Pier, and I would ride my bike down the pier, and boy, they would pump out that smell from the Garrett's stand, and it's hard to resist.
It's marketing. It's like in a movie theater when they have the popcorn going. I mean, that's the strongest possible marketing. You're just drawn to it.
Yeah.
And one of the other things I want to chat about as far as the book goes is Rainbow Cone. Before, people had to go to the South Side to go ahead and get it. Then you can get it at Taste of Chicago. Now you've got a few other places where you can try it in the Chicagoland area. But it's become such an iconic summer treat, and people wait, for the weather to get warmer for them to open up.
Yeah, I mean, and I learned from the granddaughter of the progenitor of it that he started it, Mr. Sapp, when that area of town was pretty much all cemeteries. There's still a huge amount of cemeteries out there, and then they finally put the streetcar out there. And he said, you know what? All these people on a Sunday or on Saturday, gonna go visit their relatives, and then they're gonna be hungry when they come back. And I'm going to have something very special. He was also a tool and die maker. And so he made his own spade to be able to sort of smear all 7 flavors on the cone so that, you couldn't possibly do, balls because those would be stacked up. So he had a very special tool that could make these sort of like layers on there of these really interesting combinations of flavors. And people would actually go out, for decades, go out all the way to Beverly to get them. And it could have just gone away. But now you're right. They're at Taste of Chicago. They went to Navy Pier, and now they've partnered with Bona Beef to put a rainbow cones in a lot of Bona Beef. So something that could have completely died out, stayed in one corner of the city. Though I have to say, I think when you make that trip, assuming you don't already live in Beverly, it's sort of, I took it with my mother and my son, and we went all the way out there, and I told them the story of the rainbow cone. My son was like, wow, this really works. And he was like a notorious grump, but he loved it. So something about the story and the stacking of these unusual flavors that I think makes people really love it.
The book tour. Let's talk a little bit about what's going on. Kicking off March 30th at Volumes Bookstore. Talk a little bit about what we're going to do, a talk back, book signing. What's going on?
It's going to be a heavy week, Monica.
Well, I mean, we're going to be out there, because we're both journalists who interview people. We're going to be interviewing each other at a lot of these book events. I want to do a plug for the Hideout show on April 25th. Paul Durica, who is a Chicago historian, has a game show, and all of the game show questions will be based around our book. And it's going to be in the back room of the Hideout, which I learned was a famous place to get Italian beef in the 50s and 60s when it was owned by an Italian family. It was actually kind of a speakeasy at the time. And so I'm going to see if we can maybe get some Italian beef back there.
They have a bookie operation there too?
They had something, this dice game called I can't remember what it's called.
Perhaps?
But no, it's a woman would walk around the bar and she would have these dice and you would throw them and then you could get free drink tickets. It was a very, very Chicago game. I can't remember what it's called. I believe maybe it was like the Sevens or something. And I've always wanted to do something. Yeah. And yeah, they made Italian beef back there. And it's a great excuse to say, get the book, study up so you can do well in this game, because all the answers are in our book.